Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Redefining Security podcast. Have you ever thought that we are selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power, now more than ever. HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
And just like that, here we are. It's a Monday, and it's a new Redefining Cybersecurity podcast here on ITSP Magazine. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm enjoying these live video podcasts. There's a few in the bucket now, and I've taken the chance to kind of look at a few different topics, from identity to security operations to response to risk management, all the stuff that I love and live and breathe in my mind anyway, even if I'm not a practitioner. And today's topic is rooted in identity, and I have two sessions on this topic. One is around the actual identity and identity management. The other is around secure access. And today we're digging into secure access. And I think as I was thinking about this particular topic, part of it is obviously figuring out who and what is trying to get access to something. And then there's are they supposed to have it, and how do we manage all of that? So we're going to focus on that second part. That's systems and applications and databases and APIs and I don't know, all kinds of fun stuff. But I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's why I bring cool guests to join me to help with this conversation. Shanisa Cambrick and John Sapp. John Sapp, thank you so much. Here we are. It's all about security operations, identity management, secure access. Thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean. Pleasure to be here.
And what I'd like to do maybe is to quickly have each of you say a few words about what you are up to, your role, as much as you want to share, and your initial thoughts on secure access and why this is a topic you agreed to join me on. Shanisa.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. My name is Shanisa Cambrick. I am a principal product manager with Microsoft in our identity protections division. And I'm focused on securing, when you think about emerging digital identity, what that is, how do we protect it? And so my thoughts are, this is my bread and butter. I'm happy to be here, and I love identity. I love secure access.
I love it. And John.
John Sapp. I'm the VP of Information Security for Texas Mutual Insurance Company. Been in cybersecurity risk and compliance for, about 20 plus years now. Broad range of industries from financial services to healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and I'm really focused on an overall strategy for the protection of an environment for our company, and really excited about this topic because it's, when you think about secure access and authorization and all of that stuff, and the birth and growth of secure access service edge, SASE as they call it, definitely a hot topic right now.
So maybe that might be a good spot to start, if I can only say my words correctly today. SASE. Who wants to take the definition of that and kind of what the evolution of secure access and VPNs and SD-WAN to what SASE is now. And I don't know, might be a good place to start on it. Who wants to take the first crack at that?
Yeah, I'll jump in because this is something that it's an initiative that with the pandemic has become a really hot topic, because with people working remotely, organizations found that their VPNs were stretched to the max, or they were having to add access to employees to be able to connect remotely because of the everybody becoming working from home and all of that stuff. But you found a lot of products and solutions out there that jumped into the SASE market and claimed to have a SASE solution. But it was only part of the solution. It was the security side of it, but not the networking side of it. So you take, you had CASB vendors, who all of a sudden went and decided, oh, hey, you know what? Let me add a secure web gateway, and then we can help provide you with a more secure perimeter in terms of access for your employee base. But they didn't bring along the network side of it, and so you found there were problems with trying to access. So if you were using a soft phone, for example, that was a problem. You still needed a VPN connection to be able to make that soft phone work. So I just found that there was a lot of challenges with that, and companies were launching off with these SASE initiatives. And now, if you look, there's now a redefinition of it. Now it's just SSE. So now it's just secure source edge as opposed to secure access, because of the networking side was just not part of it.
And Shanisa?
Yeah, so just piggybacking on to some of what John said, and to me, it also blends in with the whole zero trust methodology, which, sometimes vendors try to make you think it's a product, but it's really not. It's more of a framework, and there's all these different pieces and parts that need to come to it. And one of the biggest things I think that gets missed is that you need to understand what identities are in your environment. And I know we're focused more on the access piece of this, but they go together, right? Like if you don't know that you have a phone that needs to connect into your environment, then you're missing the big picture. So.
Couldn't agree more.
Yep. So, yeah, you mentioned SASE, so I went there, but I want to take a moment to talk about is, because what you both just described is there's a lot of tech available, right? There's no question about that. Every product has the silver bullet for the thing that they're trying to help with, which means you have a nice collection of silver bullets that may or may not work well together in real life. And the challenge I have with zero trust, and I understand the purpose of thinking ahead and trying to get ahead and shift things left and all those buzzwords and buzz phrases we want to throw out there. But in reality there's a lot of legacy stuff inside organizations, and there are a lot of legacy operations and processes and people that have been around forever, right? So how do organizations look at secure access now and kind of get their hands wrapped around that in a way that meets the business need? And I don't know, it's a very broad question, but I guess what are some of the challenges organizations face with putting the future of SASE and SSE aside, and where should organizations kind of focus?
Yeah. So I'll jump in, and hopefully John can add some color here, but a lot of security professionals may not like my answer, but to me it goes back to risk and what is the business goal? What are the business drivers? And that's going to color, how do you actually secure your environment and where your investments go? You mentioned that there's a lot of companies that still have legacy, and that's because they've put that investment there and they're not willing to make that transition to something else at this point in time. So that's something that you have to factor in and you'll have to live with to some degree. And trying to change that mindset will be a top-down decision.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, Shanisa. And when you think about it, it's the knowing what systems you have in place, what type of access do you need. I mean, it's not just the people. It is, and when I think about the concept of zero trust, it all becomes digital trust. And, it's what are those environments you're trying to connect to? Because there are a lot of digital transformations going on right now. So people trying to transition as much as they can from some of those legacy platforms, but it's not something that you can do really at a fast pace. So, if you're trying to move to the cloud, like a lot of organizations are, mine included, um, it has to be very well thought out, planned out, and because with those legacy platforms, you have some limitations in terms of whether it's just password configuration. So you've got the mainframes and the mid-range systems that are there. In a lot of financial services in industries, they just can't get rid of right now. So there's a ton of historical data that still needs access to, and so it's the thinking about the who and the what are major components of that. Who, in terms of whether it's an employee, whether it's a business partner, or someone or vendor that needs access to your environment to support your environment on some of those legacy platforms, or whether it is, um, you know, um, uh, just any number of different types of uh, people or things that need access to your environment, because you've got APIs, and then that's a whole nother topic of API security. So I don't want to get us off track, but I could talk about that for days. But yeah, legacy platforms are a huge piece of the consideration.
Yeah, and then thankfully there are no tracks here. That purposefully no agenda, no specific place to go here. So what you're pointing to, both of you, are just the sheer complexity of the number of systems, the number of people, the applications, where the data is. John, you talked about moving to the cloud. Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Is it hybrid? Where is it all? And how do we manage all that? So my question is, who owns, I have many questions, but who owns secure access? Is it networking? Is it security? If it's both, is there another group like the business involved, or risk management? How does the secure access program, if there is such a thing, kind of come together? Who owns it? Who's involved?
So I would say it's a team sport. So all of the above, essentially. All of these different players need to come together to understand how your environment is structured. And John talked about the who and the what, but you also need the why. Why do these individuals or these entities need access? I like to say identity of things, because now, as John mentioned, you have APIs, you have bots, you have cell phones that need to connect into a network. So all of these come together to paint that picture, or need to be part of your picture. And in addition to that, thinking about, your supply chain. So what other companies are connected into your environment, and why and when and where do they need access? So I'll quit saying, this is the big picture, but to me, that really is like all these components need to come together.
Oh, I absolutely agree, and that's a very important addition that you put on that. Who and what is the why, because it is about risk. IT risk is business risk at the end of the day, and it is having an understanding of who needs access to what and why they need that access, and what risk does that pose to the business, and how do you manage that risk. And because you think about it, and seems like every day there's some mention of some potential breach, or some unauthorized access to an environment. There was, you think about the couple that came up in the last few weeks, and there's a large concern about what is the risk.
So I often feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that organizations and security teams have to find the right balance between managing risk today, future-proofing the business for tomorrow, making investments that won't just live for today, but can survive through transitions to the cloud, new business models, new business services, whatever the changes. Threat landscape, of course, changes. So where does the big picture for secure access sit? Is it in risk management?
I think it certainly starts there because it is knowing and understanding what is your external attack surface. What because the perimeter is pervasive, but I don't know. I mean, right now, people and the things that are accessing the environment is the perimeter, and it is where do those things go? Where are those things coming from that have to be considered? It's we think about things in terms of do you allow access from certain countries, um, things like that. It is definitely an exercise in risk management and something that in our organization and what I've seen over the past 5 to 7 years is it's something that is a topic of that sits on the ERM committee agenda. It's something that boards always want to know about is what is our risk, because that's the question we're being asked about in the boardrooms today. Is it's not, and that's really how me personally I've justified the spend on security technologies and capabilities and the services and or the resources needed to protect the systems and the data.
Yeah. And I would say also looking at the future of where you think your company is going. Again, John mentioned about those transformations that a lot of companies are taking. And one step of that is, moving into the cloud. But then looking even beyond that of thinking about things like the metaverse. Does your company feel like they're going to have a footprint there? And what does that mean for your cybersecurity posture? So there's that, looking at risk today and then looking at risk in the future.
Yeah, the explosion of virtual identities. Yikes.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And multiple verses coming together. So where does the connection happen between risk management and policy and controls? Because how do organizations usually approach this? How should they approach this? Is it based on the most precious resources, the most precious business unit, where the biggest risk sits, regardless of value, or we're about to embark on this transformation program, so now's a good time to look at secure access as we develop this part, or it could be all of those things. But I'm wondering, where's your experience lead an organization to say this is a good place to start mapping risk management to some policies and controls? Shanice or John, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think about it in terms of knowing and understanding what are your most valuable assets. So I think about it in terms of everything is an asset in my mind, whether it's people, process, the actual technology, the data, everything is an asset. So you identify what are those assets that you have, what are the ones that you feel the greatest need to protect, and what's the risk to those assets, and what's the impact to the business from a financial perspective, because everybody understands risk in financial terms, which has always been something that's difficult for us in security to try to quantify. And I've been working at risk quantification, gosh, for the past 10 years in trying to put it into financial terms, not just in terms of metrics that say, oh, we've had this number of events that became incidents and all of that technical data. It's put it into some terms will that the business can understand, that the boardroom can understand. And so it's really trying to frame that picture of these are the assets that we have. These are the ones that we collectively want to protect the most because it has the greatest impact to the business is where I start with it.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And a couple points I would add would be kind of where you start may depend upon the maturity of the company, right? Some companies do have a greater appetite to see security put in place and greater controls put in place. Some companies are fine with what's not broke, let's not fix it, type of scenarios. And then the other piece of this, what's really worked well for me in the past is building partnerships with our governance and risk and compliance teams. Because at the end of the day, if you have a compliance mandate that you need to adhere to and you fail that compliance, there is a cost to that. So they can help you in selling that security posture to your business and your management.
Yeah, I think it's that risk versus reward conversation.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I've probably even said it more times than I've heard. We need to change the culture of security to not just block access for the sake of protecting the organization, but to actually help drive revenue and embrace the risk in a way that you can push the organization forward. How have you experienced that, if you have, where you've made a decision on, okay, this is how we're going to manage access, knowing that there is some risk there, but it enables this part of the business to achieve its objectives, and we have other controls to compensate the risk of that secure access being made. Shanisa?
Well, one thing that comes to mind right off the bat is the fact that all of us went home during a pandemic, and security enabled a lot of employees to work remotely and continue business operations. So there is a driver that actually helps the business in that case. Then there's the cost avoidance, which is, it's one of those things that you want to try to use the least. You want to show that security is actually adding additional value versus taking away those expenses. But again, the one that comes to mind is the fact that we can all work remotely in a secure way based on security posture being enabled.
Yeah, and what I'd like to add to that is, security, as we've all heard the concept of, security needs to be an enabler and not an inhibitor of any sort. And so I've had the opportunity in past roles to actually drive security innovation, and how do we take security and make it a competitive advantage. I did this back in the healthcare world, where you have early on, when application security became a hot topic, in 2008 2009 time frame, and it was trying to sell that. It was the one way that I sold it was as a competitive advantage, because if we were able to demonstrate that by leveraging security technologies to protect data, to not just meet compliance requirements, but to also show and drive confidence in a product or service, that's one way to frame it up. But you have to be able to deliver on that and show the value of security in it. So you think about when the HITECH Act came about. That was one of the things. Was it was all about how do I protect the data? How do encryption was being pushed as a big thing. So okay, so if we are able to deliver encryption or other types of data protection, DLP or whatever it may be, to our customer. So my customer would be the business, but the business's customer would be, let's say, a physician or a physician practice or a hospital, who was also struggling with the same things of, how do we protect this data? We're using company X's software in our environment. So what are their security controls that they have in place? And so we deliver that, because you have a small practice of 5 doctors, let's say. They don't have an IT staff. So as a software vendor, I was able to convert my cost center to a profit center by delivering a security capability such as encryption and DLP to our end customer, so that they could literally, it just became a line item on the order sheet.
John, you might need to start a training course for other people on how to do that.
Exactly.
Only if you're going to join me.
Well, let's talk about that a little more, because what I'm expecting to find in there, John, is kind of that small 5-person doctor's office. Mm-hmm. They don't know the encryption lingo. They don't know the access lingo. They don't know the IT lingo, right? Let alone the deeper security lingo. And I'm expecting that whether it's a mature company driven by risk management and GRC, or a less mature, smaller organization who's kind of doing it all themselves, there's a lot of value in going back to that why and telling a story, right? Why are we doing this? Why is this important to the business? How and then maybe the how do we enable the business to succeed there. You're ready to chime in there, John. How important is storytelling? And maybe, I don't know if you have any examples that you can share with that maybe help make
I
that real.
do, and actually, I guess it's written all over my face. I don't hide my emotions or my thoughts very well, but yeah, storytelling is, I think, critical. I once worked for one of the large consulting companies, and that was a key part of how we delivered things to our clients is through telling a story. Helping them understand the who, what, when, where, and why. And you will eventually get to the how, because the technology is the final piece of the puzzle. But there's people, process, and technology, right? So it's the story about, and I'll tell you the story in really short. But how I sold that back in 2009, I think it was. That so you take a healthcare organization that produces and creates a anesthesia cart. And so, and at the time the movie Awake was out, so that actually helped a lot in telling the story. But you've got there's, and it also has a risk context to it. So, you've got an anesthesia cart, so you've got a patient, of whatever age, going in for an operation, and so the cart administers the flow of anesthesia based on the patient's condition, age, all those different things, right? So if software is installed on that, which runs that, it is internet connected, and there is some type of an attack or even just a security flaw or vulnerability that gets exploited, even accidentally, because in an application you could have a buffer overflow just from somebody, kind of entering the wrong birth date or age of a patient. Now that all of a sudden there's something that goes wrong, overflow happens, the application restarts. So that's classified as a security issue. So that happens, the cart restarts, it stops the flow of anesthesia to that patient in the middle of an operation. That patient wakes up. Not a good idea, not a good thing for anybody. So now you've got the risk of, you've got legal risk, because of there will be lawsuits that will occur. You've got financial risk, because now your product is going to be pulled from the shelf because of compliance risk, because the FDA comes along and says, hey, this thing is not safe, there's been an incident, so now there's an investigation. You've got operational risk, both to the hospital and to the organization who sold them the software. The risk is never ending. So now you've got all those different categories of risk. And so when you tell that story and you identify the risk that's in it, now all of a sudden they get it. And then it became, okay, so what do you need to ensure that this doesn't happen to us?
And Shanice, I don't know if you have any, let's keep telling this story. Any examples to kind of take that, obviously that's John's story, but maybe one of your own that says, okay, now we're going to, or maybe we already have this working group, right? That encompasses the teams you mentioned earlier. And this is our story. This is what matters to the business. This is what we need to protect. How do we drive that throughout the rest of the organization now, in terms of who sets the policies, who enforces those through controls, who's monitoring them to make sure they're still in place, and if they do go off the rails, what's the remediation in response to that? How do you get us to that place from that initial story?
Yeah. So for me, I definitely don't have a story that's as deep as John's. It's not life ending potentially, but yeah, in terms of, thinking about, I keep going back to the word big picture. When it comes to access, what's been successful for me is building that sense of empathy with your business and what are the pain points that you're trying to solve for. A lot of times it may be something as simple as we want to be able to onboard a user within 1 day versus 2 weeks at a company. And so, what are the security processes that need to be put in place to enable that? What are the compliance concerns that may be preventing that? And how can we address those through some security policy or methodology, or even a tool? At the end of it, I think it goes back to being able to talk with people, not just making assumptions about, the business is thinking one thing, security is thinking another, and, compliance is on a separate tangent somewhere. Bringing everybody together in one place, having the same conversation of what is the business strategy here that we're trying to enable.
John, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the last few words that Sunisa just said was, what is the business strategy that we're trying to enable? That's the key, because whether it's healthcare, where you're trying to enable the secure delivery of healthcare, because the chief medical officer is your number one opponent that you're really having to work against, because they will always tell you, we're trying to save lives here. So I don't, as much as I get and understand the need for security, I can't have you slow down a physician's access to what they need in the OR. I can't have you get in the way of being able to onboard a doctor, or if there's an emergency surgery that needs to happen, my person needs to be able to get into the system right away without having to go through putting in a 15 character password and all these other things. So, that's where, biometrics and all these other things come into play. And, it's helping them. I think the word Shanisa used was empathy. It's about having empathy for their concerns, but taking that into account and considering how can I enable you and to do your job while I also do mine at the same time. Because at the end of the day, a failure on either of our parts has a significant impact to the organization. So I think it's kind of putting the minds together. And it's financial services. It's about protecting somebody's financial assets. With the explosion of virtual payment methods and all of these types of things, security was a big part of enabling that to happen. Because without it, now everybody's concerned, am I going to lose my money?
Yeah. So putting the life aside, it always comes back to money.
Yeah. At some point.
Yeah, exactly. So Shanisa started to touch on it a little bit in the example of onboarding somebody within a day. To me, that seems like a fantastic metric, right? That I would say maybe the securely piece complicates that measurement. What does it mean to be secure? And that's actually where I want to go with this. How do organizations and the teams responsible for secure access know that they're doing a good job? How do they define success? How do they measure success? Shanisa?
So I'll start and say it goes back to business goals again. From a purely security standpoint, you always want to make sure that there's least privilege, right? That you're not giving people more access than what they need, that you're not giving them access to things that are sensitive and they really don't require it. We talked about, from a business standpoint, maybe it's the speed of onboarding an individual, making sure that you don't stop doctors from being able to access something. And from a compliance standpoint, that goes back to separation of duties in a lot of cases, of making sure that people cannot cause harm to financials, or they don't get access to certain things that can impact business risk. And so I think bringing those things together, and I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, so I'm going to turn it over to John.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. It comes back to, it's about people, process, and then technology. Because in onboarding, there are people and process involved. So what you've got to do is you need to understand the business process, because we can't, even from a security and data protection standpoint, we can't create such a cumbersome process, or we can't burden them with a process that is so lengthy that they can't get their job done. And I think it's we need to know and understand what are the business requirements, and then we can architect solutions that take into account security risk and compliance overall, because it is that onboarding process, when you think about it. And we started at the top of this session talking about secure access. It's about providing somebody with secure access. So you need to know what's that person's role, what should they have access to, and all of those types of things. And onboarding also is includes when there's a change in terms of roles and responsibilities in an organization. So whether somebody gets promoted or demoted or moved to a lateral move to a different department, you've got to make sure that you remove the prior access and grant them with what access they need for the new role. And then it becomes, well, hey, you know what? I need this person to maintain their old access for some period of time while they train someone else, but I need them to ramp up in their new role. So it really it takes a significant conversation, but with the business to completely understand their requirements before we even start to think about technology, because it just kind of goes back to something that I said in a session I did at RSA back in 2011. A fool with a tool is still a fool, because it's you take a tool and you try to say, hey, you know what, if you lead with tools to begin with, you're going to be met with resistance, because it's going to be it's going to impede progress, because nobody has time to stop and test out the tool. But if you have established the requirements and what their needs are, then you can architect and or configure any given tool to meet those requirements.
I would agree with that, and making sure it's not so burdensome that users find ways around the process. Because sometimes your internal users can actually be your best hackers to tell you where you have gaps, because they'll find ways around. So
no doubt about it. The workaround is the greatest threat. Internal threat is still the number one risk. Mm-hmm. Human risk is I think what we're calling it today.
So let's touch on that quickly. And I'll coin it or position it as where secure access programs might fail, or we might leave some challenges. Because I'm just thinking, all right, so if I'm making somebody log in multiple times throughout the day to the same system, or they have to log in 5 times to ask, or 10 times to access their environment, quote unquote, and then we give them all the privilege that they need for everything at all times, regardless of whether they need all of that all the time. I'm just wondering, are there ways to, and I'm kind of bringing it back to story here, but where do organizations typically, I'll say, fail or miss the mark in terms of secure access programs, where they're creating chaos, creating things that go against what the business really wants? Maybe John, you start.
Yeah. So, it's, and I think this is where, there's been this concept of zero trust for a while, and trying to figure out what that is. But we really have to get to more of a digital trust capability. And that is one whereby, and even then that's going to be a challenge, because a lot of people don't want to use their personal phones in the corporate environment, because there's the fear and concern that we're spying on them. Which we're really not. We're even though you're trying to enable them and make it easier to do the things that they're trying to do, they still have other concerns. It's like, well, but I don't want to use my personal device to do that. And the company says, well, we also don't want the expense of issuing corporate devices to, now you've got to carry 2 phones. And then, well, I don't want to use my personal phone, but I don't want to carry 2 phones. So, it's kind of the, which way do you get kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But it is really about trying to find some common ground, some middle ground, I guess it is, and in terms of being able to help the business understand the risk, and I guess getting everybody on the same page in terms of risk tolerance. And we were talking about the enterprise risk committee, and governance, risk, and compliance, and all of those different things. But it really is trying to find middle ground, and that's always going to be tough. I don't, Sean, you said something about a magic bullet a little bit earlier. Yeah, I haven't found one, or I don't have any magic pixie dust, but it's a continuously evolving conversation.
Yeah, and Shanisa, your view on this, and maybe from the perspective, I don't want to bash technology. I certainly don't want to bash vendors. There's a time and place for that, because I think understanding that the environment and putting the program together can be challenging. And if there are technologies, or if there are frameworks, or if there are applications and products available that can help you kind of see that big picture, I'm just thinking single sign-on or MFA with stepped authentication, to help kind of eliminate some of the burden up front and address some of the risk as it increases over time. Are there things teams can do to leverage technology and framework, not to start there, but to at least understand better, so they can then define the story, explain the risk, and then move on through controls and management?
Yeah. Well, I say there's a product for everything that ails you. And like you alluded to, product isn't always the answer necessarily. I mean, it can be. Um, but for me, one of the things going back to is usability. So talking with your users, your user base, and understanding what's usable for them. Because if you build something that's, super secure, but it's overly cumbersome, like we talked about before, they're going to find ways around it. And so you've invested all this money for a tool that users have found gaps in, essentially. So going back to the concept of empathy as well, putting yourself in that user's shoes, understanding their journey. Should it be onboarding? Should it be, accessing a file day to day? What does that look like for them? And what security gates need to be there? And what's realistic for that particular type of access? Hardened security may have a place in certain scenarios, and it may not have a place in other scenarios. And going back to some of John's conversation about risk. So, putting those things together and understanding where you want to give users a hard time and it makes sense. And then those places where you want to give them a streamlined experience. And that's just coming from a product perspective. So.
And John, I'm going to put this question to you. I mean, I grew up in security, I don't know, 30 years now. I think that way. We've talked about security and risk as the core of this conversation. So my question to you is, are we missing the mark here? In terms of, I think maybe I kind of led it there, that GRC or risk management is the big umbrella that we should look at this through or under. Is it really business process management and perhaps even business process automation, where we really define what we're trying to accomplish for the business and then pull in risk and security and people and process and tools? You're muted. Sorry, John.
It definitely is business process automation. You see a lot of projects now going on around RPA, the robotic process automation, and things like that. And how do you leverage artificial intelligence and all of these different things? So it is about knowing and understanding the business processes. And then you can identify what the risk is in the current process so that you can go through some degree of process improvement to improve the process, and then you can start to automate that improved process, because now you can identify opportunities for efficiencies for the business and for security. But I think you have to have the GRC piece, because if there's no governance, if there's no means for how you're going to measure and monitor uh, those processes that you've automated, and how effective are they, how efficient are they, then you have nothing to leverage in that continuous process improvement. So you've got to think about that, and in every process improvement, you want to look at and understand what is the risk, and I think by doing that and leveraging security and the technologies to be able to mitigate those risks and to be able to address them, you're and leveraging the frameworks and the things that you and Shanisa mentioned a little bit earlier, by leveraging a control framework to understand what are the controls that need to be in place, and that now you've got also part of that governance is internal audit, and bringing them into the picture to assist with the monitoring of those environments. And right now I go through annually a review with internal audit. They want to know and understand how are we improving the maturity of our organization. So, and by doing all of those things, compliance becomes a byproduct, a natural byproduct of it is how I think about it.
And Shanice, as we wrap, maybe any final thoughts from you on that, or something else that we maybe didn't touch on?
I mean, just to wrap, we talked about you need this tiger team of people from security to compliance to business to come together. And I think that's really so important just because each of us has our blinders on. Security is totally focused on, hardening an environment, whereas compliance is looking at, what's the risk. And the business is saying, I just want to operate and make money for the company. So all of those perspectives are needed to make sure you have a streamlined access process.
Love it. And John, any final word from you?
Final thoughts from me is I agree 1,000% with what Shanisa just said. And, it is about a collective effort between the business and IT and all of those different groups, and, the business includes legal, it includes internal audit, it includes corporate strategy. And by having all of those, knowing and understanding who the key stakeholders are, I think is a priority. And if you do that, know your key stakeholders, know and understand what their requirements are and what their needs are, then I think we have an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's such. I just my brain is scrambled a bit because there's so much there. And so many parts in play. I mean, we didn't even get into a lot of the intricate details of what does it look like on-prem versus the cloud. We certainly didn't get deep into APIs and machine-to-machine, right? And we definitely didn't get into metaverse.
All the fun stuff.
All those things just blow this up beyond recognition in my mind. So I think for me, it's to the basics, understanding what the business is trying to accomplish, what the governance is to ensure that happens in the right way. That includes compliance and security, and then making sure the right team players are in place to figure out those stories that drive the policies, that drive the controls, and hopefully in a way where you can actually say, this is what success looks like, and we can measure it, right? Which is not pissing off the users and keeping prying eyes from seeing stuff they shouldn't. So with that, fantastic conversation, Shanisa and John. I'm thrilled to have you on. Appreciate your time and insight here. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. It was a pleasure.
And to those watching, thanks for joining us live or on demand on YouTube or on the page. And for those who are catching this as a podcast, I appreciate you listening to this conversation. And there'll be some links here. Hopefully, Shanisa and John will share some links of either frameworks or processes or some tips or tricks, some Medium blog they came across that would help, or a Twitter thread, who knows, whatever. We'll put those in the show notes. And I mentioned this is a two-part. So I have the first part coming after the second part. This is part 2. The first part is around identity management, and we're looking to do that one next week, same time, same day. So please stay tuned for that. And thanks everybody for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Security podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.